Hello and welcome to round 5 here at the World Championships here at PAX. I'm Tim Willoughby, joined by Luis Scott Vargas and Jackie Lee from R&D, and I'm pretty excited because we've just seen Shaun McLaren talking about his deck. He's up against Yuuya Watanabe, and both of these players seem to have some pretty interesting takes on control in Modern. Let's head down to the feature match area and see what they've got to show us. Hello and welcome to round 5 here at the World Championships at PAX. We obviously, every round, have a huge amount of talent in the feature match area. This round, no exception. Let's have a look at the players that we're going to see in our first feature match.
Shaun McLaren, Canada. Top pro points at large.
Yuuya Watanabe, Japan. Top pro point, Asia Pacific.
So round 5 just about to start. Luis Scott Vargas, Jackie Lee. We've got a few interesting deck lists to look at here that aren't necessarily some that we would necessarily have expected to see.
Yeah, Yuya's especially. We haven't seen Blue-White played for a while, and he's playing kind of a mix between control and tempo with a lot of Restoration Angels, Vendilion Clicks, and Kitchen Finks, as well as multiple copies of Dragon Lord Ojutai.
Shaun McLaren there just revving himself to start. He's not lost a match so far, but I don't know whether or not he'll have been too happy to see the exact list that he got to have a little shifty through just before this match. Yuuya Watanabe there, patiently waiting as Shaun was doing his deck tech. But he has had a chance to see the lists. Both these players know what they're in for, and that's potentially quite a lot of counter magic.
One of the hallmarks of this match is they're both kind of playing mid-range-ish decks. Like they're trying to control the game, but you know, it's essentially going to be fair. Cards like Grim Lavamancer, Young Pyromancer, Kitchen Finks, these are cards that just attack and block and do that sort of thing. And you use slightly larger, which tends to be good for the person who's slightly larger. Just having more, 2, 3, and 4 drops instead of 1 and 2 drops is generally a good thing.
It's interesting because Shaun was playing a deck that was probably more like the deck that Yuuya is playing today about a year ago. He was playing the red, white, blue version, of course, which had Kiki Jiki, but the Wall of Omens, the Restoration Angels.
And that's what won on the Pro Tour.
Yeah.
Lots of familiar ground here. We see Young Pyromancer in play, immediately getting a 1/1 red elemental for Shaun McLaren, thanks to a Gitaxian probe. But for a Path to Exile coming from Yuuya Watanabe, just because he's slightly more mid-rangey does not mean he can't interact on turn 1. And now we get to see exactly what's in Yuuya Watanabe's hand, because all of a sudden there is a Gitaxian probe showing us what's going on. So the Path to Exile, that just got cast, but everything else there, we see Wall of Omens, Kitchen Finks, Dragon Lord Ojutai, Cryptic Command, and then a few lands there. Dragon Lord Ojutai, kind of a new addition to the blue-white control decks in Modern.
Yeah, and Yuya's got a pretty nice hand here where he gets to go Wall of Omens into Kitchen Finks, into Cryptic, into Ojutai, just 2, 3, 4, 5, assuming the lands cooperate. And that's a pretty good start, though. Shaun being on the play and having already 2 creatures and 3 lands in play while Yuya has alone planes in play, that's pretty good for Shaun.
Now, this is something that I think a lot of players, when it comes to control, it can take a bit of a feel. How important is it to get the first threat in under counter magic compared to just having more powerful cards?
It really depends on the specific matchup. This matchup actually is not that much about counter magic. Both players are playing cards like Remand instead of actual hard counters. So the fact that there's 4 mans in Shaun's deck, 2 in Yuya's deck, and then they've got some Cryptic Commands and a couple mana leaks, then that's really it. Most spells are going to resolve. So this is more about board position than it is about keeping up counter spells.
Wall of Omens there, drawing a card for Yuuya Watanabe. A card that Shaun McLaren has had success with in the past, but in this case, a pretty helpful pickup here for the Japanese player, because it does mean that at least the regular straightforward ground attacks are a little bit fiddlier.
Especially the control decks with the higher casting cost cards like Restoration Angel, like Dragon Lord Ojutai. These really want to keep drawing lands so they can make their land drop every turn, keep curving up with more powerful threats. So do we know if he... Yeah, he's drawn another land, so if things keep going this way, he should be well matched against McLaren's more sleek build of the control deck.
Yeah, Shaun McLaren, he got the extra land off Path to Exile. He actually doesn't really need quite as many lands in play to do everything that he needs to. So in some respects, the Path to Exile's downside, not so big a downside there.
Yeah, Yuya's deck is mana hungry. He has Celestial Colonnade. He's got cards like Sun Titan. He can definitely use 6, 7, even 8 lands. Shaun's deck is built to try to stop at 4. It's even got Desolate Lighthouse and Serum Visions to try to make sure you don't draw excess lands. And in a matchup that's going to take a long time, again, that's another reason I think Yuya's got on the good side of things, just because both players are going to draw a decent amount of lands. Neither player is capable of winning all that quickly, and given all that, I would rather be the deck that cares about having extra lands in play. So that was a patient play from Shaun here. He chose not to remand Wall of Omens just because this doesn't add all that much to the board.
Yeah, those Wall of Omens doing the main work just by simply drawing a card for Yuuya Watanabe. I mean, he certainly doesn't mind having them there to block, but this is not a matchup where he's too afraid of any one creature swinging in.
And here you see Shaun in a little bit of trouble because even though Shaun was ahead early, the fact that he doesn't have a young Pyromancer in play accumulating value, Shaun's not progressing his board. Yes, he's going to get to remand an expensive spell from Yuuya, but Yuya's got a ton of cards in his hand, isn't dying anytime soon, and the late game does favor Yuuya. So Shaun's best card is Pyromancer, and I think Yuuya knew that, which is why he was able to snap off a Path to Exile, as painful as it is to cast that card on turn 2.
Kitchen Finks there. You see Yuuya Watanabe holding it just above the board. He's sort of asking whether or not there's a counterspell from Shaun McLaren. The answer is no, so 20 life is the new life total for Watanabe.
And Yuya's perfectly content trading that Kitchen Finks for like Grim Lavamancer activations. He even left up Spell Snare, which he's got in his hand to counter a potential remand. And he's got an Ojutai, which Shaun's not going to have an easy time dealing with.
Yeah, that's one of the cool things about Modern. Every zone is a resource, even your graveyard. So the fact that Shaun could potentially just spend cards from his graveyard to deal with the Kitchen Finks, well, Yuya's happy to do that.
Now, something that I sometimes find difficult when I'm watching a control deck or a deck that's not necessarily immediately looking to commit lots to the board is, if I'm watching this game, how do I tell who's winning?
Life totals? No. Life totals can be deceptive, though in this case they are actually accurate. I believe Yuya's ahead this game. And what you have to figure out a few things. First, you have to figure out what direction are the games going if the game lasts a bunch more turns. And again, our assertion is that Yuuya is going to be ahead if this game lasts 5, 6, 7, 8 more turns. And the second is board position. Right now, the board position is fairly even. No one's too obviously ahead. So given that the board position's even, it's not changing very rapidly. You can even just look at cards in hand. Yuya's got more cards in hand than Shaun does, so that's one indicator.
Of course.
Lands is another indicator. For the control deck mirror, the deck that stalls out on lands tends to be in a very bad position.
We're in the fortunate position of not only being able to see the number of cards in hand, but actually being able to see the hands themselves. The detention sphere there, dealing with one of Shaun McLaren's creatures, and we can see that in Watanabe's hand, a couple of the premium cards for any kind of control deck.
And because he's under no pressure, he can spend tons of time on this Ojutai. If you notice, he hasn't cast Ojutai the last couple turns. I think he'd rather leave up Spell Snare for a remand, and maybe not even walk into Cryptic Command, a card which Shaun is certainly representing.
Yeah, it is really important to leave your mana open in a control mirror.
Remand there on Kitchen Finks. I guess Shaun McLaren here just sort of saying, well, I can't afford to just let this sit here forever. I need to draw into something, and Remand will do that for you.
We're going to see in this matchup a decent amount of remand targeting the player's own spells. Like if Yuuya casts this remand, he's going to be targeting his own Kitchen Finks. The reason to do that is that'll let his remand resolve. He draws a card. Shaun's doesn't resolve, doesn't draw a card, and Yuuya just ends up a card on that exchange.
Yeah.
Shaun has a second remand. The real question is, does he target his own remand again and not care about the Finks resolving, or does he just target the original Finks?
Normally, I think that in the control mirror, you'd be targeting your own remands with the remands. That's one of the best things to do. You can get your cards back, save them from a counterspell, and also draw a card. But Shaun is behind in this board position, so the fact that he chose to do that, well, it might not be as bad for him as it looks.
So a strange exchange there where lots of remands got cast, and some remands ended up back in their various owners' hands. Kitchen Finks there, going back to Watanabe's hand, ready for another turn where we already know that Shaun McLaren has another remand.
Yuuya did miss his 6th land drop there, which Yeah, it's not the end of the world. He can definitely cast all his spells. He wouldn't mind another land here, but he just drew a Restoration Angel and a Cryptic Command, so now Yuuya can just play the game at instant speed, which is very good for him because, again, he's not getting pressured at all.
Yeah, and again, his cards are typically more powerful. They're more expensive. They have more of a board position, so that seems like a really good thing for him.
And this is where having deck list really comes in handy. If I were playing this match and I was Yuuya and I didn't know what was in Shaun's deck list, I would think he was Splinter Twin, for sure. I just look at all these cards, and I'd be very worried about losing to Exarch Twin. Yuuya's seen the deck list. He knows Shaun only kills with Young Pyromancers and Grim Lavamancers. He knows he's just fine just playing the long game and taking things slowly. Shaun can't win out of nowhere.
So Shaun McLaren here, sort of weighing up his options. This game likely to take a while. You can already see in the background there Paulo Vitor Damaderosa looking to his sideboard because that first game against Martin Dang has now completed. Living End versus Grixis Twin over there. A bit of a tough one for Grixis Twin, for the Living End deck there because Grixis Twin can stop the namesake spell and that can be a bit of a problem. Yeah, Paulo was there, of course, successful in game one. He was able to counter the key spell from Martin Dang, at which point the Grixis Twin deck has plenty of time to actually assemble its combo.
Yeah, Twin against Living End is generally favorable for Twin just because it has an instant speed kill and it has counter magic, and both those things are fairly good. So you played a Restoration Angel to get an extra card, immediately ate a Lightning Bolt and a Grim Lavamancer activation, but still, Blinking Wall of Omens puts you up a card here. And Yuuya still hasn't found another land, but he's doing just fine. The fact that he has 5 lands and all spells is a lot better than having like 3 lands and all spells. And though Shaun did draw a Young Pyromancer, I think Yuuya's got a comfortable enough life total that he's not really in a ton of trouble here.
And here we see Restoration Angel coming down again for Yuuya Watanabe. The first one, yeah, that one was okay to deal with. The second one, I mean, each subsequent Restoration Angel, that much more difficult for Shaun McLaren to deal with.
And it looks like he's attempting to use a Remand. I think he even just assumed it resolved, but Yuuya does have the Spell Snare.
In Shaun McLaren's coverage of his own deck, he mentioned Spell Snare as a card that basically counters everything. Clearly, it does only counter 2-mana spells, but it's kind of funny that in this format that represents a fairly large proportion of the real threats that you're worried about.
Yeah, between Snapcaster, Remand, and Young Pyromancer, that's a lot of spells. Also Mana Leaks. So now Yuuya's got all the land in the world. He just drew, Celestial Colonnade and Flooded Strand. And the Restoration Angel resolved, so he might feel a little safer playing an Ojutai here, but I could just see passing with Cryptic Mana up. You're not losing here. There's no reason to walk into something.
It looks like he may have 2 Cryptics in his hand, in which case he probably just really has the game on lock.
Yeah, we've already established that Cryptic Command, kind of exactly what any control player is looking for. You've got so many different options for making sure that nothing too bad to you happens. Sometimes you're countering spells, sometimes you're drawing cards. If you really need to, you can return permanents or tap your opponent's creatures. But one way or another, it fills most roles.
So Yuuya content just to flood the board with Omens and Finks, which I think is going to work out just fine for him because Shaun doesn't have one-turn devastating play. Even if Shaun goes Resolve Pyromancer, play 2 spells, a bunch of tokens aren't getting by a Kitchen Finks.
Quick update from one of the back tables. Brad Nelson, he's on Jund. He has defeated Kentaro Yamamoto, at least in his game 1. Brad Nelson, the lone dissenter in that team in terms of playing green-white hexproof. And so far it seems to be going okay for him, though it must be said that his tournament not necessarily off to a blistering start. He didn't have the best of time in the Modern Masters.
So Roast getting pointed at Kitchen Finks just indicates what kind of interactions are going on in this matchup and how bad they are for Shaun. Clearly he's going to take out Roast once he gets a sideboard, but he had to roast Kitchen Finks. He traded 2 mana in a card to give Kitchen Finks -1/-1 and gain Yuuya 2 life.
Yeah, that's tough.
And of course that Celestial Colonnade, at some point, if Watanabe really wants to, can be used to shorten the clock as another attacker in the air. I can't really think that Yuuya's in that much of a hurry, though, just swinging in here with his Restoration Angel.
Is it finally time? Are we going to get to see an Ojutai? It's so powerful.
Ooh, it seems like it might be happening.
Yeah, it's so powerful that Yuuya can just tap out, and even if this doesn't work, it just doesn't matter. Like, it's not like Shaun can just seize the initiative all of a sudden. Another really important interaction here is remand and flashback cards, because Yuuya's got a remand in hand. He can wait till Shaun goes to flash something back, remand it. It still gets exiled. Yuuya draws a card, so it's one way to mitigate Snapcaster being awesome, even though it is still quite good.
Yeah, I don't think that the Snapcaster's too worried about being pushed out of the format by this interaction. But
Certainly not.
At the same time, absolutely a very valuable interaction. Here we see the Dragon Lord Ojutai, the new addition to blue-white control from Dragons of Tarkir, 5/4, hexproof as long as it's untapped. This is not quite a full hexproof deck, but when it counts, it is there, and it provides just an ample source of card drawing for Yuuya Watanabe once it starts swinging in. The worry, of course, for Shaun McLaren being on 8 life. One swing from Dragon Lord Ojutai plus the Angel is enough to seal up game 1.
Ojutai has hit the building. The building, of course, in this case being Shaun, because Ojutai is going to rumble over in a second here, assuming Shaun even has the heart to last that long.
Yeah, it doesn't even get a chance to come in like a wrecking ball. Shaun McLaren immediately going to his sideboard. And we're going to get a chance to go and see some other Magic right after these messages.
The world's best strategy game is now letting you play free. Magic Duels Origins delivers an entirely new digital Magic experience. Available now on iPhone, iPad, Xbox One, and PC via Steam. Visit magic.wizards.com/duels to download the game today. Qualify for the next Pro Tour on Magic Online. Go 5-0 or 4-1 in one of 10 preliminaries to advance to the finals. See the full schedule at mtgo.com.
Hello and welcome back to our round 5 feature matches here at the World Championship at PAX. And while the players on our main table are shuffling up, sorting out their sideboard for game 2, we're going to get a chance to see a little bit more Magic, this time from our King of the Hill table. Paolo Vitor Damaderosa there, up against Martin Dang and looking to find a way of his Splinter Twin deck dealing with Living End from Martin Dang. And
here you see the rare turn 2 Living End, where Martin just was impatient, just turn 1 cycle a Deadshot, a Minotaur, turn 2 Simian Spirit Guide out a Living End to kill a Tasigur and put a 3/4 into play, which is a pretty cool play. Whether that's going to be good enough against a Grixis Twin deck, it depends on how much land destruction Martin has to follow it up with.
Well, I mean, I guess getting Tasigur into play that early is a pretty neat trick as it stands. I mean, he did have to play some fairly sort of aggressive use of fetch lands and so on to get enough cards in his graveyard to make that happen. And so Martin Dang was able to sort of mitigate that early threat. And, I mean, a Deadshot Minotaur will get a few hits in.
It will, but the fact that Martin doesn't have any more lands, which of course, spurred him into playing this, it is a pretty big drawback here. He's not able to do anything else, and that 3/4 by itself is not going to do it.
Yeah, it's a tough spot. I mean, because of the way that Living End is built, it can't have any creatures that cost less than 3, which means that when Paolo Vitor Damaderosa sees that there are 2 lands in play, he's just got free reign to go for it in terms of what's in Martin Dang's hand. Here, seeing a Demonic Dread. There's a Whitflare Trap, which is kind of interesting. Dismember, Architects of Will, Simian Spirit Guide, and then, yeah, he's got plenty going on there if he gets land, with Beast Within there at top. But in the meantime, Paolo just has free reign to do whatever he wants.
Martin could go all in. He could Simian Spirit Guide out Beast Within on one of his own lands to make a 3/3. I wouldn't advise this plan, but it is an option. He can throw away all his resources.
So Dismember going away there as the lone spell that's properly castable for Martin Dang. Of course, he is able to cycle the Aquatex of Will. They're also cycling a Deadshot Minotaur, finding a Fulminator Mage. But what he really wants to find is exactly what was on top of his deck. Oh, a little bit preemptive.
Looks like Paulo's going to Exarch or Pestermite on upkeep here.
There it is. In reality, whichever land he tapped down was always going to be pretty good here. Again, as we mentioned earlier, 2 lands, not nearly as good as 3 for this Living End deck. And I believe that Martin Dang has drawn a 3rd land there.
Yeah, it looked like a Bloodstained Mire, which doesn't let him cast a 3-drop this turn unless he wants to use Simian Spirit Guide. Funnily enough, the Exarch actually keeps back the Minotaur, so Paulo's kind of stabilized.
Sorry, can I add the text and Ricochet Trap before I read it? Yeah, sure. Okay.
Paolo there, asking for some text on a card, but given it's a card he just saw with Thought Seize, Martin Dang has no real problem with just winging it across and letting Paolo get a good read.
So Ricochet Trap, the trap cost is 1 red, and you can use it if your opponent played a blue spell, and it just retargets a spell. So the most obvious use of this is just to stop counter magic. You play a Cascade spell into Living End, they play a Mana Leak or a Remand or Cryptic Command, and you can use Ricochet Trap to retarget that spell. The cute thing is it costs 1 mana to play in that mode, but it's a 4 mana spell, so it doesn't get cascaded into, which is why it's in the deck.
Right. It's also why the deck is playing all of these expensive creatures like Deadshot Minotaur that you just wouldn't see in other modern decks.
Yeah, it's not quite aggressively costed. It has to compete with the likes of Tarmogoyf and Siege Rhino, which are slightly better.
Nonetheless, Martin Dang at least having options here, able to get something going, though we're now at that stage of the game where at any point Paolo Vitor Damarosa could just cast Splinter Twin, and the good thing is that he knows with the amount of mana available for Martin Dang, there really isn't any kind of opposition that can be presented by the Dang.
Yeah, Martin's in a position where if he wants to leave up Beast Within, he has to spend so much mana every turn just doing nothing. And that's a big advantage for Paolo. That's one of the ways that Splinter Twin really takes advantage of deck construction, is that if your opponent wants to leave 3 mana up to counter a Twin, then you can just not play your Twin and proceed as normal.
But it seems like these players enjoying the opportunity to slow roll us and being able to get a preview from Battle for Zendikar. We are going to have a preview for that after this round, so do stay tuned. But in the meantime, these players making the most of their time in the spotlight, giving us plenty of Magic to watch.
Yeah, I would say that the Living End deck has a surprising amount of interactivity. If Paolo were to try to go off with his combo of Splinter Twin and the Deceiver Exarch, Dong could Violent Outburst in response to play Living End, but unfortunately, this interactivity is also Dong's win condition. So while Paolo can play cards at the end of turn and kind of advance his board slowly, Dong does not have that option.
And if he is forced to use a Living End, a Violent Outburst into a Living End, that is making his actual winning the game part of the match a little harder.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, Dang's list, not unusually, has 3 copies of Living End total. He's already had to use one of them to get rid of Tasiga. At some point, it does become a concern just saying, well, I've got this deck that's named after one card, and I don't have any more copies of that one card.
I have seen people cascade through their entire deck, so it does happen.
It's not completely unknown to suspend a Living End, but not really in this matchup. That's more in the slower creature-based matchups where you just suspend one and stall the game until it goes off.
Vendilion Click here coming from Paolo Vitor Damarosa. That means that he's able to either improve his hand or get a look at Martin Dang's. Because of all of the mana issues that Martin Dang's had, I think he's just more keen to make sure that Paolo Vitor Damarosa himself has a good draw. So he gets rid of a Lightning Bolt that's not too impressive, draws something else.
And Vendilion Click is Paulo's favorite card in all of Magic for kind of what it just did. It's so flexible that it can disrupt your opponent, make your hand better, present a good attacking clock, trade off in combat. And you see Martin passing with all these 3 mana spells in hand because he's just worried about keeping Beast Within up, which Paulo's taking full advantage of.
Yeah, I mean, Paolo now in a place where he can say, I'm not too worried about going off with my combo because while I've got a good attacker in play, I can just gradually get stuck in. Pestamite there joining the team, meaning that Paolo has plenty of attackers in the air. Of course, if it does reach the point where Martin gets up to 5 mana, an option, albeit not a great option for him, is to start casting things like Deadshot Minotaur and just sniping things out of the skies. Realistically, if we see that happen, though, it probably means that Martin Dang not in great shape otherwise. But it looks like our main table, our match between Shaun McLaren and Yuuya Watanabe is just kicking off. Just the first couple of permanents coming to play there. It might be worth just jumping back so that we can make sure that any early flurry of threats, probably from Shaun McLaren, doesn't get missed. He's just got his first non-land permanent in play, that one being a Relic of Progenitus.
Relic of Progenitus is kind of interesting. It doesn't interact with all that many cards in Yuya's deck because Yuya doesn't have Snapcaster Mage, but it does stop Kitchen Finks from coming back. That's pretty much the main utility that it's got.
I guess it does also draw a card. It's not the worst card to draw, even when it's not doing anything too active, just because it has little options available to it like that. But in this early few turns of the game, I'm kind of expecting to see both these players just hitting their land drops, trying to do whatever they can in terms of card drawing, just to make sure that they're never too far behind just in terms of lands.
It is a bit strange, though, because Shaun would have to exile cards from all graveyards in order to draw the card, and he does play Snapcaster Mage, so...
It's definitely a cost, but I guess Shaun has enough cards in his deck, like Roast, for example, that he just didn't want. Yuuya did get some value out of a sideboard card here. It looks like he Celestial Purged the Young Pyromancer, which is one of Shaun's best cards. Though Yuuya, his Kingdom for a Mystic Gate, since he's got 4 in his deck, and that'll turn 1 white mana into 2 blue, because it looks like Yuuya's stuck on just 2 planes and a Ghost Quarter. You know, if he has to, he can Ghost Quarter himself to get an island. It's not the kind of play you want to make, but when all else fails, that is a way to get blue mana.
Meanwhile, Shaun McLaren here, able to fetch lands to keep on track. I mean, as we've noted earlier, he doesn't necessarily need to see quite so many lands in order to be able to do everything that his deck wants. That's one of the strengths of Blue-Red Pyromancer in this matchup. And I guess that being on the play as well, in principle, he could have got something going. In practice, though, that something got Celestial Purge pretty fast.
On Yuya's deck list, I believe his planes are listed as Mistveil planes.
Ah. This is interesting. So there's a question just about the deck list for Yuuya Watanabe. I think that Shaun was thinking that there were some planes listed as Mistveil planes. We'll see if we can just get that cleared up.
3 Mistveil planes. At least that's what
I have super.
Yeah.
I mean, we have the actual list in front of us, and it is listed as 3 planes. So I don't think it's too big a worry, but just something that Shaun wanted to get cleared up there.
Though, if he brought in Blood Moon because he thought there were Mistveil planes, not actual planes, that is pretty awkward. This would knock Yuuya down to his 3 islands left in his deck as blue mana sources, so he has to decide now whether he wants to Ghost Quarter one of his planes in order to get one of those islands.
Yeah, it looks like he's doing it.
Well, we said that this matchup could be about hitting land drops. This effectively a Blood Moon in order to Stone Rain Yuuya Watanabe at this point to destroy one of his lands. It does now mean that he's a little short on mana, but he's got the mana for one last remand.
And that gives you an extra draw at finding a land. It also lets him find one of his Flooded Strands, which can then turn into a basic before the Blood Moon comes down. Or the worst Flooded Strand in the world, Ghost Quarter.
Yeah, Shaun only has a couple of Blood Moons in the sideboard, but I think it's pretty reasonable to bring them in against Yuuya. As you mentioned, Yuuya tends to win the mid and the late game because his cards are larger and more impactful. So if Shaun can kind of just stick a Blood Moon early, then it's possible that he can get his threats to remain impactful.
Yeah, I mean, there's only 3 islands in Yuuya's deck, which means that casting a Cryptic Command becomes comparatively tricky with the Blood Moon in play. Detention Sphere, they're able to deal with the enchantment before it really caused too much of a worry. I mean, the other side of it, I suppose, is that when there are 4 Celestial Colonnades in your opponent's deck, if you resolve and get to keep in play a Blood Moon, basically you're preemptively killing those creatures.
And the cost of boarding in Blood Moon is not super high. Shaun gets to board in maybe even just 1 Blood Moon if he wants, or 2, and he gets to play that. It doesn't impact his mana base that much. And even if it just shuts off Yuuya's Colonnades or makes Cryptic a little harder to cast, that might be enough.
But looking at Shaun's hand here, it does seem to have a pretty impressive array of counter magic and sort of controlling options here. He spoke earlier about being an electrolyzed guy. He has that available to him. That there effectively most of the time, a 2-point burn spell to the head and draw a card. But drawing cards is pretty good in this matchup.
Drawing cards is often pretty good.
It seems that Yuuya thinks so too. He's got a Wall of Omens there. It'll be interesting to see whether or not that's enough to warrant a spell snare from Shaun McLaren. And he says, yep, that's good enough.
The problem, again, with Shaun's game plan here is he's not doing anything to pressure Yuuya. Like, yes, Shaun has a hand of 4 counterspells and an Electrolyze, one of which is, I guess, a Snapcaster, but that's not going to end the game, and eventually Yuuya's going to get something into play. Shaun needs a young Pyromancer in order to really pressure. This is where not having the card Delver of Secrets in your deck is a big liability. If Shaun had Delver of Secrets in his deck, I think this matchup would be much, much better for him.
Yeah, I mean, this is the sort of deck that historically could easily have been called Blue-Red Delver, with a cheap threat and then sort of compounding, sort of backing up that threat with some counter magic, with some disruption. In this case, the threat isn't Delver, but it's certainly proved to be a powerful deck nonetheless. He is currently 4-0. Just a quick update for you on one of our back tables. Kentaro Yamamoto falls to 1-4 as Brad Nelson defeats him with Jund. It looks like Yamamoto could be in slightly tricky shape to do a repeat on last year, where he did make the top 4 of this World Championship. And Seth Mansfield also 2-0 up against Jacob Wilson. So they're hexproof auras, proving its worth. He had a little bit of a rough ride last round, Seth, but this round, back on track, he is now at 4-1.
So Yuuya does have a lot of cards in his hand that he can't cast. He's got Ojutai and he's got Cryptic Command. And yeah, it's not really helping him out a whole lot right now, but the lone Grim Lavamancer is still not quite enough to force Yuuya into action. He does have Supreme Verdict, which is pretty nice in this matchup because it just clears everything out and is just uncounterable. That uncounterable clause is key against a deck full of Remands, Mana Leaks, and Cryptics.
Serum Visions here for Shaun McLaren. His draws are going absolutely fine. The big issue that I think that he's having really is just the fact that Yuuya Watanabe, when he gets to actually cast a threat, it's a much more threatening threat.
Yuuya's getting close to having to discard the hand size, which is not the thing you want to do on turn 11.
Yeah, this would have been a very different game if Shaun had stuck a young Pyromancer early.
And Shaun did draw another one just last turn, so my guess is that he's waiting until he's got all his mana untapped before trying to go for it. He also has to respect Supreme Verdict, and playing Pyromancer and getting Pyromancer plus Lavamancer hit by Verdict is something he looks like he's unwilling to do.
Well, it looks like Yuuya's willing to expend a removal spell to try and get rid of this Grim Lavamancer. It gets one last shot off on the way out. Shaun McLaren's graveyard not looking particularly exciting now, just a lone Electrolyze.
I like Shaun's patience here. He could have played Pyromancer. He could have fought over this path to exile. I like him just saying, okay, because part of the ways he wins is just a good use of resources. If he's able to go like Snapcaster, Electrolyze you, attack you twice with Snapcaster, just forces Yuuya to run into his counterspells. And Shaun didn't even cast Gataxian Probe because he wants to save it for when he has a young Pyromancer in play.
Yeah, I think this really speaks of all of Shaun McLaren's experience. He has won a Pro Tour playing red, white, blue control. He came in the finals of another Pro Tour. He very nearly won against Ari Lax with a Jeskai deck as well. This very much his comfort zone when it comes to Magic the Gathering. And we're seeing, currently 4-0. And even if he's in a little bit of a tough spot in this match compared to some of the others, he clearly knows what's going on.
Yeah, a common mistake of weaker players is to aggressively play things in the control mirror because this kind of not doing anything for several turns on both sides makes them nervous, but it's often the correct thing to do because everybody has so many counter spells.
So we're going to see a bit of a fight here. If you see the Pyromancer's currently getting targeted by Spell Snare. Shaun has multiple ways he could respond to that. He's got Spell Pierce, which he's not going to cast right now because he has too much mana up, and he's got Dispel, which seems like a good place to start.
Dispel, of course, noteworthy because the Spell Snare that is sat in Yuuya Watanabe's hand is not going to be a good answer to it. If we just take a little look at what is available to Watanabe to work with, he also has a Dispel.
Well, he can just let it resolve and Spell Snare the Pyromancer again, which looks like is what he's opting to do. Now, because Yuuya is out of blue mana, Remand will let the Pyromancer resolve. Shaun could also go the slower, more control-ish route of just remanding his own Pyromancer and trying again next turn, but being up a card. Wow, he just let that happen. That I'm actually surprised by. I would have figured that he really wanted to fight over Pyromancer, but it looks like he's content not to.
Supreme patience here from Shaun McLaren. And now he goes with the Gataxian Probe, so he gets to see everything else that Yuuya Watanabe is working with. Let's bring that up so you can see it too. So Dragon Lord Ojutai is there, Cryptic Command, Supreme Verdict, Dispel, and Spell Snare. So plenty of counter magic once the blue mana becomes available. A great answer to threats whenever he needs to use it, and then a big finisher. Almost everything a control deck wants, but no land.
I think the main reason Shaun did not fight over this a little harder is that he's worried about Yuuya untapping and playing Ojutai if Yuuya hit a 5th land. And Yuuya does have the Ojutai, so that's a very valid concern. Yuuya's drawn Restoration Angel, but if I'm Yuuya, I'm not feeling very confident about it just resolving. You might as well go for it, but the question is, do you go for it now? That I like. Shaun cracked a Scalding Tarn. Basically, the shields are down for a half a second here, but he can't cast Mana Leak or Remand.
And a threat on the board is certainly something that Yuuya is looking for. I mean, this an interesting matchup because it's not one that's ever going to be won fast. It's about sort of picking your spots, and this way Yuuya says, right, I've got a good moment, let's use it.
So the natural instinct is to fetch end of turn to get a Steam Vents. Shaun did give you a window to resolve a Restoration Angel. To be fair to Shaun, though, Yuuya didn't have it in his hand last turn, so it had to be the one card drawn that Shaun didn't know about, which I think may have made him willing to take that risk.
Shaun McLaren, plenty of options in his hand also. We can see there he's got the counter magic. He's not really going to want to use that Snapcaster Mage for nothing. As it is, he can use it to draw a card. Gitaxian Probe there being the card that gives flashback to leave as much mana open as possible.
This Restoration Angel is problematic, though. Because Yuuya is able to resolve it, he now isn't under pressure by this Lavamancer or the Snapcaster Mage. So Yuuya now is just happy. Actually, it looks like he's even starting to race. I guess he's got a fifth land out, so he might be going for something larger. Is he just going to cast Supreme Verdict? Looks like he's thinking about it.
Now, we can see that he's drawn the extra island. That also, of course, means that he has got counter magic available to him next turn for some of the things that Shaun McLaren might want to do.
Yuuya is very aggressively protecting his life total here. You see this like firing off Supreme Verdict, casting Path to Exile on a Lavamancer. Yuuya just does not want to get burned out, which I feel like that shows confidence that he's got the late game. So he just wants to make sure he has a high enough life total once he gets there.
Yeah, it's interesting. The way he played Restoration Angel, the mode was almost Lava Spike, right? But that makes sense. He has card advantage in the late game, so it makes sense to make plays like that.
Also, he does have another threat. I mean, once he reaches a point where he feels safe that Shaun McLaren can't have too much to stop his dragon, it's not going to take very many swings for Ojutai to clean things up here. Shaun McLaren here protecting his life total by actually paying regular mana to cast Gitaxian Probe, and 5 cards in hand for Yuuya Watanabe here. Let's take a quick look at them. Dragonlord Ojutai, he's been hanging out for a while there. Dispel, Path to Exile, Spell Snare, and Cryptic Command.
Once again, we're in a position where Shaun has a lot more land than Yuuya, and that's much worse for Shaun.
Yeah, even if they were sort of in a position where they had similar decks, at this point Shaun probably would like to have a few more spells. As it is, while Yuuya has more expensive spells, he's now able to cast everything as and when he needs to.
Yeah, Shaun unfortunately also hasn't drawn any of the Desolate Lighthouses that he'd spoken of.
And he is running 2, which is more than most would do in these sorts of decks. He just has to look on as Kitchen Finks getting cast here by Yuuya Watanabe. It says, well, I've got this Mana Leak. It's gradually reaching a point where it might not be able to do too much. Let's fire it off while we can. To which Yuuya says, I've got this Dispel. What do you want to do about that?
Additionally, the Kitchen Finks is fairly important here. I think one of Shaun's ways that he can win is by dealing enough damage directly to Yuuya before he can stabilize. And this Kitchen Finks is going to potentially put him out of range.
Well, now's a good time for Spell Snare. There's not the mana available to pay for that. So Kitchen Finks does go to the graveyard.
And Shaun's big decision there was whether to remand his own Mana Leak and then recast it, or use the Spell Pierce. I like to use the Spell Pierce because Yuuya doesn't have a ton of expensive spells that you're really going to be able to Spell Pierce at this point. Cryptic Command is one, but once Yuuya draws another land, then that avenue is kind of closed. So Yuuya drew Mystic Gate. The question is, does he go for Ojutai into a handful of 5 cards? He's got a Spell Snare as backup, but he doesn't. He has no protection against a Cryptic Command or just Shaun having 2 counters of basically any kind.
Yeah, Shaun has already showed that he's happy to throw a few counters into the ring if needed.
And he has 5 cards in hand at this point, so being a control deck, one would assume that he's got to have at least one kind of counterspell.
In the meantime, though, one benefit that Shaun McLaren does have is that when he wants to deploy a threat, it really doesn't trouble his mana too much. That Grim Lavamancer not really meaning anything in terms of how much counter magic he could still have available to him.
So even though Grim isn't a huge threat, Yuuya, I think, is very happy to use Cryptic Command here because it's a 4-mana spell. He's fine it getting countered, but he wants to spend his 4 mana on this spell while he can.
And there's a remand on the Lavamancer. That meets a Spell Snare.
Was that the Dispel?
Yeah, he Spell Snared the Spell Snare so that the remand resolved on the Lavamancer. Shaun draws a card. Yuuya doesn't because Cryptic has no targets. And then Shaun could just recast Lavamancer and still have Mana Leak up if he wants. He could even have Cryptic up at that rate.
Yuya's hand all of a sudden looking comparatively bare, and this, I guess, what Shaun McLaren has been trying to achieve for the entire game.
Yuuya has 2 cards in hand. Shaun knows their Ojutai Path to Exile. Shaun can't afford to fight over this path here because he knows Ojutai resolves if he does. But Yuuya really looking to draw a Dispel here. If Yuuya can just draw another Dispel, I guess he only has the one, so that would be difficult. But otherwise, this Ojutai isn't going to resolve. It's going to get countered by either Mana Leak or Cryptic Command, depending on what Shaun prefers.
And this is exactly what we've seen Shaun McLaren do with these sorts of control decks the entire time he's been on the Pro Tour, is just gradually run people low on resources. He's now being beaten up by a Celestial Colonnade, but in terms of cards in hand, Yuuya Watanabe is really kind of struggling here.
Yeah, I like Yuuya's play, though. He's got to know that Shaun has an answer to Ojutai, so he's just going to attack with the Colonnade and make it so Shaun is the first person to take action. Shaun has some temporary answers. He can Cryptic the Colonnade, he can Snapcaster Cryptic the Colonnade, but he can't do that indefinitely.
Supreme patience being showed by both of these players here. The life total's 9 to 11. Plenty of play left in this game, though. Yuuya Watanabe obviously keen to shorten that clock with subsequent Celestial Colonnade attacks.
And this is exactly why Yuuya's running this line of play. If Shaun's starting to Cryptic Yuuya's lands, then Yuuya's getting a pretty big advantage. Oh, this does give Shaun an opportunity to get Blood Moon back into play by bouncing Detention Sphere.
Very smart play here. That just as effective at dealing with attacking Celestial Colonnade as any of the other modes on Cryptic Command would have been. And in fact, meaning that as long as it stays in play, there's going to be a little problem.
Just to make sure we're on the same
Wow.
page here.
Blood Moon, certainly one of the cards that shows up on the judge test more than most. And Yuuya Watanabe here just saying, I just want to make sure if my land is also a creature, but now my land is a mountain, how does this work? What's going on? Always, of course, makes sense in any situation at any level. If you're not quite sure how the board state's meant to work, this is one of the reasons that the judges are there.
The Colonnade gets its last hit in, though you could eventually remove the Blood Moon in another fashion.
And the reason that works is because the text on Celestial Colonnade says it becomes a 4/4 creature until the end of turn. So even though it is a mountain, the ability of the Colonnade still lasts until end of turn.
Wow. So this is our last match in the feature match area now, because Paulo Vitor Damarosa is now our king of the hill. He is 4-1 against Martin Dang at defeating Living End 2-1. So we will be with you for this match until its conclusion. After the conclusion of this match, we will get a preview from Battle for Zendikar. Please stay tuned to find out about that. In the meantime, though, so much in play here right now. The Detention Sphere once again dealing with Blood Moon if it resolves.
So Sphere took out Blood Moon and then Wall traded for a Mana Leak.
Yep.
Second Wall may resolve unless Snapcaster Mage. Looks like Shaun's just going to go for it here. He's going to presumably Cryptic the Wall of Omens here. Or it looks like he's just going to buy back Cryptic on his Snapcaster, which if you have enough mana, it does give you a pretty good sequence of plays here.
Yeah, there's little in Modern that feels better than snapcasting a cryptic command.
Oh, yeah, that's for me.
It signals that you're doing all of the things right with your control decks. You've got plenty of lands in play. You're doing lots of things. Many of those things are super duper powerful.
We almost saw the 3-mode Cryptic there, but that draw was for Shaun's turn. They clarified it.
Good.
If you can find another Supreme Verdict, he's going to be in great shape here.
Yeah, and I guess that's one of the good things about Young Pyromancer is that you don't need too many other creatures in play for it to be worthwhile pulling the trigger on a Supreme Verdict. Realistically, he kind of has to.
I think we might see it at Game 3, though, because if Yu goes for Ojutai, Snapcaster, Remand, then all of a sudden Shaun has just lethal in play. But if Yu just activates Colonnade, he can't quite kill Shaun. It looks like he's just going to knock Shaun down to 1 here. But Shaun has Snapcaster plus Electrolyze. He can deal a lot of damage.
So Shaun on 1 life, but 1 conveniently, infinitely more than 0. And that enough to force Game 3 here. Close games of Magic, we've got 1 more.
Yeah, it's difficult when Yuuya has to use his Colonnade so aggressively. That just keeps him from being able to use so much mana on his turn.
Now, this is, of course, as you can see there in our wide shot, the last match we have in the feature match area. So rather than a look-in, we have a bit of a chance to have a look at some of the sideboards that we're working with here. Because this is kind of an interesting matchup where there are things that each player can do to bring in to try and make things a little bit more controlling, for example, in this case. I mean, in Shaun McLaren's sideboard, we can see Dispel, Roast possibly not quite so exciting. There is Blood Moon available. But this not necessarily a sideboard that's super set up for a really controlling match. How do things look on Watanabe's side of things?
He has the Dispel, which he would love to have more of. It's such an important card in this matchup. He's just got the 1 Dispel. Celestial Purge is another great card because it kills both Blood Moon and Young Pyromancer. Past that, Glenelenge Archmage is a nice one. I love that card. And the
Absolutely.
Archmage is a very powerful card.
It's a great card.
Yeah, 3 and a blue for a 2/2 Persist, and you can pay a blue and sack it to counter a non-creature spell. So it's a pretty good value card. Not a whole lot else. Mind Sensor is an instant speed card, which is nice, but it dies so easily to Electrolyze that I don't think Yuuya wants it in his deck.
I mean, I guess one consideration that there might be for bringing in the creature for this Game 3 is that times are ticking. That last game did take a little bit of time. They are each going to have to just concern themselves about making sure they are able to complete this match. Unlike last year at the World Championship, there is a time limit. It's a fairly generous one with 60 minutes on the round, but you do still want to actually get the win. The draw's not necessarily something you want to pick up at any time in the tournament. And even though it's day 1 and there's plenty more rounds to play, you'd be much happier actually completing things.
Yeah, and as we mentioned in the pregame, if these players draw, they neither of them gets a pro point. So the 1 pro point that's at stake here just gets incinerated. So that which is certainly a tragedy. So I don't think either player is looking for that to happen.
So each player here drawing their 7 cards. I don't necessarily look at either of these decks as being ones that really capitalize on the Vancouver mulligan too strongly, but obviously a nice option versus just a regular mulligan if you do need to take one.
No, I think these decks would be happy enough to abolish that mulligan rule, for the field if they could. I mean, obviously they'll take use of it if they can, but for the most part, they don't really get as much out of it.
Yeah, this is how the blue decks make sure that their draws are nice and smooth. It's not about scrying on turn 0, sorry. It's about scrying 2 on turn 1 with Serum Visions.
Right, and when you're playing threats like Dragon Lord, Ojutai, and Sun Titan, every land counts. So you definitely don't want to go down to below 7 cards, if at all possible, and just reduce your chances of topping out at the maximum number of lands.
Flooded Strand there, finding a plains for Yuuya Watanabe. He's not going to get caught flat-footed by a Blood Moon in this game. It feels like a very long time ago that there was all of that shenanigans with Ghost Quarter to make sure that Blood Moon wasn't too strong. This turn, things are a bit more straightforward. There's a Wall of Omens, But a big play here early on from Shaun McLaren. First up, the young Pyromancer, now the Gitaxian Probe, and let's take a little look at Yuuya Watanabe's hand right as Shaun McLaren does. Plenty going on here. Kitchen Finks aplenty. Celestial Purge seems like it's going to be a pretty swift answer to that young Pyromancer, but with one elemental already in play, Shaun McLaren can't be too sad about at least forcing action from Yuuya Watanabe rather than holding up too much in the way of counter magic.
Yeah, this is an excellent hand for a game 3 when the control mirror is short on time. The Kitchen Finks in doubles, very good against Shaun McLaren, playing a lot of burn and so forth.
We also see one half of kind of a cool combo that's an addition to blue-white control now. Minamo School at Water's Edge, very powerful with Dragon Lord Ojutai, able to untap it at just the right moment to make sure that it has hexproof as and when you need it.
So Yuuya hoping here that to draw basic planes, now that that Blood Moon has come down, the Celestial Purge interplay gave Shaun the opportunity to resolve a Blood Moon. Yuuya can pass to exile his own Wall of Omens if he wants, but other than that, he doesn't have a ton of answers. I wouldn't be surprised if Path gets cast here. Pathing the Pyromancer is clearly the safer play, especially since Shaun doesn't have blue mana because that Blood Moon does affect him as well. If you do Path Wall, you can start casting Kitchen Finks though.
Yep, and he does have 2 of them, so it seems like that's a very reasonable play for him.
And it's the one that he goes for. Casts Path to Exile, fetches upper planes. So now we see both players with a reasonable amount of lands in play, and in spite of that Blood Moon, with access to most of the mana they want, even if that Celestial Colonnade, Ghost Quarter are simply tapping for red.
Yeah, and Yuya's gamble is that 2 Kitchen Finks will power through a Pyromancer and hope that Shaun doesn't have a ton of spells he can cast. The good thing for Yuuya is that Shaun actually doesn't have a ton of spells he can cast because the counter magic isn't going to be as good if Yuuya's not putting spells on the stack.
Kitchen Finks rumbles in. With Persist, it's unafraid of blockers. It can always come back if it does get beaten up. And a second Kitchen Finks comes along. That meets a remand.
Spell Snare for the remand.
And of course, Blood Moon here. The dark side of Blood Moon for Shaun McLaren is that he does actually only have access to 1 blue mana, and that means that counter battles get a little bit fiddly.
You know, it's going to be tough for Yuuya to actually finish the job with these Finks, though. Electrolyze basically takes out a Fink because it makes one into a 2/1, and then the 1/1 token you get finishes it off. There's already 2 tokens in play to block the other one. I think that eventually Shaun is going to power through these. Yuuya is going to need something else on top of them.
I guess the good thing that Kitchen Finks is doing for Yuuya Watanabe is buying him time.
What he hopes they buy him is an Ojutai.
And what we can see here is it appears that Yuuya Watanabe has drawn a 3rd copy of Kitchen Finks. If the first 2 don't get you, perhaps the 3rd one will. 3rd be the charm here. And we can see Shaun McLaren eyeing up that Electrolyze, and he says, I'm going to put 1 point on each. Get an extra blocker.
This is gaining Yuuya a lot of life, though, so it is very possible that he can survive this early stage of the game to draw his more powerful threats like Ojutai.
Yeah, Yuuya's got plenty of time here. Shaun just needs to draw Parade of Serum Visions and whatnot. He has drawn Desolate Lighthouse and Sulphur Falls. The Blood Moon, even though it forced you into pathing his own wall, which is definitely a disadvantage, the Blood Moon right now isn't helping Shaun very much.
I mean, I guess the one consideration of time that we've not mentioned so far is how much time is left on the clock.
How much physical time?
There are 8 minutes at present on the clock. I've just heard from our spotter, Marshall, on the floor. So it's not necessarily a foregone conclusion that this match is going to end in the way that either of these players really want. They are going to have to watch out for just literally running out of minutes. Gitaxian Probe, meaning that Yuuya Watanabe very quickly flashes that he has just a lone Spell Snare in his hand. Desolate Lighthouse, the draw here for Shaun McLaren. Not necessarily as exciting as it would normally be for McLaren because, of course, of that Blood Moon that's in play. Blood Moon that has perhaps not really performed exactly as he might have hoped for in this game because, actually, he could really use a little bit more blue mana and, indeed, the card draw from the Lighthouse.
Well, he can use the lighthouse to dig his way into more blue. I would not advise that. So Yuuya is happy enough trading Finks for tokens here. Not the best trade, but by attacking with the 2/1 Finks, he makes it so the 3 power Finks gets through.
Shaun McLaren here, 10 life, taking hit from the 3/2 Finks there.
And Snapcaster Mage actually has a card it can cast. It can cast Gitaxian Probe, even though Shaun's on only the lone blue mana, keeps drawing lands that aren't basic. So Blood Moon really actually locking Shaun out of casting multiple spells a turn here.
I mean, there are actually only 2 islands left in Shaun McLaren's deck for him to draw. So he's potentially in a little bit of a tough spot here for blue mana. Always one of the sort of considerations when it comes to running Blood Moon in your deck is exactly what kind of a split that you want. Blood Moon, in some matches, completely ends the match. In this case, it's kind of good, but not necessarily with this draw.
Yeah, having only 3 islands in his deck, one would assume that when he played Blood Moon in the early game, he wasn't thinking that he would get more blue sources. Unfortunately, he also wasn't expecting Yuuya to have all of these kitchen Finks to kind of stabilize and go towards the late game when Yuuya can actually take better advantage of the board through the Blood Moon.
Well,
Yeah.
part of the reason is that Shaun normally sides in Blood Moon, like you said, in matches where he just crushes. This is kind of a value Blood Moon, which, looks like it is good overall in this matchup. It certainly has constrained Yuya's choices, but Shaun isn't winning off just Blood Moon, and the fact that it has a drawback on himself is very real when the game lasts this long. Wow, that was a huge draw for Yuuya. Restoration Angel is exactly the kind of card he wants to draw because he knows he can win a fight over it, at least until Shaun plays a second island.
Well, there is that second island, so now an awful lot more options live for Shaun McLaren. Neither of these players are in a spot to be able to cast Cryptic Command, but plenty more threats are available for each player now that they have a reasonable mix of mana. 5 minutes now left on the clock.
So Yuuya, again, being very patient with this Restoration Angel. He does not want to run it into a mana leak.
Spell Snare generating an extra token for Shaun McLaren and successfully stopping that Wall of Omens. A little pause for thought there for Watanabe before he let the counter magic resolve.
Unfortunately, Watanabe being at 31 doesn't seem like that little elemental is going to help too much.
Now, I don't know if either of you remember the circumstances in which Shaun McLaren won his Pro Tour, but there's a card in Yuuya Watanabe's hand that reminds me of that very much, that card being Threads of Disloyalty. That one stacks up pretty well against a young Pyromancer, if it will resolve. Currently, of course, it requires a second blue mana, but if Yuuya can find it, it certainly seems pretty powerful to me.
Turn 1/1.
So this is, I think, going to work out reasonably well for Yuuya, since Electrolyze is getting cast targeting Finks and Yuuya. So Yuuya gets to respond with Restoration Angel. Shaun's going to try to mana leak it. Then Yuuya has his choice of counter magic. Shaun being locked out of playing a second counter magic spell because of his own Blood Moon.
Yeah, Shaun here, forced to act first. He taps one of his islands to cast the Electrolyze, meaning that he's not quite as adept in a counterfight as normal. So Restoration Angel briefly takes Kitchen Finks out of play. That just long enough to remove the persist counter, and when it comes back into play, an extra 2 life for Watanabe, who at this point you have to wonder whether or not it's even really worth it bothering writing down the life totals for him. 33 is going to be a pretty big amount to get through for Shaun McLaren in this now dwindling clock.
Yeah, there is a very real chance these players do end up drawing at this point. There's less than 5 minutes left, I believe, and that makes it hard at least for Shaun to win. And it's possible, certainly, but it is going to be difficult.
It looks like Yuuya has drawn a Detention Sphere, which is really good against all of those elementals right now.
It's also good against the 2 young Pyromancer. Yuuya has a wealth of options. Actually, with Shaun just at 10, Yuuya could just fly over with that Angel a few times, and that could do it. Shaun doesn't have an answer to the Angel right now.
Yeah, 3 minutes left on the clock. I think that if ever there was a time for attacking, that time must be fast approaching. All the counter magic in the world in Shaun McLaren's hand may just not be good enough at this point.
Yeah, being capped on islands is so unfortunate.
Yuuya once again running the path my wall of omens. That's apparently his answer to Blood Moon. He's done it twice this game.
Well, it seems to be working.
Yeah, always worth remembering the additional options available with cards like these. Path to Exile on your own creature to fetch up lands. Absolutely an option, and one that Yuuya Watanabe has used. And it's actually been enough to draw a mana leak from Shaun McLaren there. Who, of course, does get 2 more elementals for his trouble. Achievement unlocked. He may have been able to run us out of elemental tokens. Of course, that particular achievement doesn't come with any pro points. I'm sure he would far rather simply win this game. 32 damage, though. That's an awful lot, especially when a detention sphere comes from Yuuya Watanabe.
Yep.
I think Yuuya felt bad that there weren't the right tokens, so he decided to remove them all from the battlefield.
They didn't match. It was unattractive. It wasn't a good board state.
Well, we've just heard that there's 1 minute left on the clock. We're in full-on countdown mode now. Yuuya Watanabe swings in, takes Shaun McLaren to 7. This is going to be very, very close indeed. Gitaxian Probe means that there's all of the information available to Shaun McLaren about what's going on. He gets to see that Threads of Disloyalty. He sees the Remand. He sees the Spell Snare.
Having to pay actual blue mana, which he's so limited on, instead of just paying life, which at this point he is more limited on, is also quite regrettable.
Grim Lavamancer there coming down for Shaun McLaren, but Yuuya Watanabe's turns are nice and quick. He knows what he needs to be doing. He swings in, takes Shaun McLaren down to 4 life now, and another Remand in his hand means that he's got all of the tools that he needs to hopefully keep Shaun McLaren from doing a huge amount more, at least from his side of things.
Shaun does have Grim Lavamancer out, though. So between the Grim Lavamancer and the Snapcaster Mage, Shaun could threaten to kill the Angel. Shaun is again short on blue mana because he has to pay a blue for Snapcaster, pay a blue for Electrolyze. At that point, Yuuya casts Remand, and Shaun's out of luck.
And time has now been called. So, for good or for ill, we have 5 turns to go after this one.
If Shaun is able to deal with this Restoration Angel, then maybe he can survive the 5 turns.
That'll leave Yuuya with the option of maybe dealing with the Blood Moon and trying to get over with the Colonnade for the last couple points. But it's Yuuya's game to lose here. Or game to draw, actually, because Shaun isn't going to be able to kill Yuuya in time. It would take a very strange turn of events for that to happen. So it's either going to be a win for Yuuya or a draw for both players.
Straightforward decisions again for Yuuya Watanabe. Attacks Shaun McLaren down to a single point of life. Snapcaster Mage coming down here. A hugely versatile creature that obviously, when there's so many instants and sorceries in your control deck, you can do an awful lot. Cast it end of turn, flashback one of your powerful instants. Unfortunately for Shaun here, he's just never really been able to get past the fact that he's a little bit light on blue mana now that this Blood Moon's in play.
And Yuuya had to let that resolve. He needed to fight over the Electrolyze instead.
Remand does it. The spell doesn't go back to Shaun McLaren's hand because it's simply getting removed because of flashback.
And even though he has 3 mana, he cannot cast it again because he only has those 2 islands. This is such a sad story that the Blood Moon has caused.
I mean, it's not necessarily uncommon for Blood Moon to create some pretty sort of awkward game states, but not necessarily
Look,
the
Shaun
story that Shaun was
drew
expecting.
the second Snapcaster, so Shaun will be able to kill the Angel. Yuuya does not have very much time left to actually try to win the game because Angel is now going to die. So he drew one of the few cards left in his deck that could actually kill the Angel.
Shaun McLaren, once again, showing the reason that 1 point of life is so much more important than 0. He's still just alive, and now basically he has to just dare Yuuya Watanabe to find a way of winning this game.
Shaun deciding whether it's even worth attacking. So The awesome part is if Yuuya draws another island, a basic island, he could cast Threads of Disloyalty, he could take Grim Lavamancer, and he could activate it off Blood Moon.
Wow.
Always nice to have options, right?
There's the basic island.
Wow.
And I think that would be on turn 5 of turns.
This is turn 3, so there is time. Is Yuuya going for that line of play?
It doesn't look like Shaun has any burn left, so
There we are.
wow, it is very possible that this is going to happen.
Of all of the ways for Shaun McLaren to lose a match in the feature match area, Threads of Disloyalty, I mean, this is the card that people were going and getting him to sign at the end of the Pro Tour because it felt like just the hallmark card of his finals match back when he won the Pro Tour. And now Threads of Disloyalty proving that it may not be super loyal because...
I mean, disloyalty is in the title.
Yeah.
It can't be too unexpected.
This is exactly the way Yuuya drew it up when he built his deck. This is how you finish matches.
Wow.
And a big win there for Yuuya Watanabe.
Great.
You can see both players smiling. These are the kind of interactions that are the reason that I like to play Magic. You never quite know what's going to come up, even once you hit the highest level. I would be surprised if either player had actually made that exact play before. So that the end of our round 5. The first 2 rounds of Modern are already in the books, and there's a lot of different decks in this format that have a plenty of play, and it's certainly interesting to see how many different options being employed by the various players that have shown up to these World Championships. We've seen some very, very aggressive hexproof decks, but I found it pretty refreshing to watch a good old-fashioned control match.
Oh yeah, that match definitely delivered. There was a lot of action there,
Yeah.
and it was really fun to watch. The ending was the best, though.
Yeah, that was really poetic.
But I'm Shaun McLaren, of course, that was his first loss on the tournament. He's certainly by no means in any kind of rough shape right here. Now, if anything, opens up the field to plenty more players to feel like they're kind of on top of things. Palavitor Damaderosa winning in his round. He's 4-1. Yuuya Watanabe 4-1. This is going to be an exciting World Championship. Plenty more rounds to show you. And I'm going to be back down on the feature match floor next round, so I'm going to get to see even more matches, as are you, because we've got all sorts of Magic coming up for you soon enough. But we're all finished now, so I'm going to send you across the news desk because I know that Rich has plenty to show you, including something to do with Battle for Zendikar.
That is absolutely right, Tim. We do. We're just a couple of minutes away from an exclusive Battle for Zendikar preview card here. But we are coming to the end of round 5. Why don't we scoot straight down to 4 from the floor and show you what's been going on away from our feature match area. In these, we decided to take a look at Martin Muller up against Owen Turtenwald. Here we see the players in action. There's Turtenwald busy reading one of the cards there. I imagine that was not actually to find out what it did. Muller at 3-1, Turtenwald 3-1. They are together, and I can tell you that it was Martin Muller who won that one. He goes to 4-1, a tremendous effort. We're going to see him in just a few minutes as well. Now, Steve Rubin was at 2-2, and so was Thiago Saporito. They were both there. So there you see, just finishing off their match, Muller to 4-1. Here's Steve Rubin. First glance we've really seen of him up against Thiago Saporito. They were at 2-2. Who would get the edge to move one above 500, as it were? Well, it was the Brazilian. Thiago Saporito fighting back, doing nicely at 3-2. Rubin at 2-3, still with a chance to have a positive day 1 record. So here's Jo Larsen against Andrei Strasky, 2 of the European players here at the World Championship. Again, both players were at 2-2. Strasky opened up 0-2, so fighting back. But on this occasion, he couldn't go to 3 wins in a row. It was Larsen who took that game to go to 3-2. And the 4th of our 4 from the floor, well, that would see Li Shichan from the Asia-Pacific region. There you see him in his MTG Mint card shirt up against the reigning player of the year, Mike Sigrist. Li Shichan in his traditional pose, deep in thought. There's the affable Sigrist from face-to-face games, and it was Sigrist who won that one, going to 3-2, Li Shichan to 2 and 3. That's our 4 from the floor. But no more talking about this tournament. Let's whet your appetite for Battle for Zendikar.